Hey, folks, welcome to John and Pete Talk Fishing, brought to you by all our friends at Amsoil. How are you today for the May edition of our visits?
Well, I'm very excited, and maybe the biggest reason is there's what I normally, while we're out fishing, I call the ugly orb. It's up in the sky today, and we haven't seen it much up here, so it's a little bright. I've been rubbing my eyes when I'm outside, but yeah, I'm kind of hoping it'll melt what's left of the ice, and yeah, away we'll go with spring here.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the month of May is like Christmas to us guys who love to fish. It's opening weekend, the first Saturday in May in Wisconsin. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the second Saturday in May in Minnesota. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I
it's
think
literally
so.
a week after in both cases. Muskie too. After the Muskie
Okay.
opens, it'll be the following weekend in Minnesota.
And for our friends in Michigan, it is the same, the second Saturday in May. And our friends on Lake Erie in Ohio, they don't have to worry about opening day. That's every day down on Lake Erie. But no, it is an exciting time for me, Pete. And, you and I can reminisce a little bit here. When I was like 15, 16 years old, which is quite a few years ago, we started the tradition of going up north to Vilas County, St. Germain area every year. And opening day was a big deal in Hayward back then too, wasn't it?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, I wouldn't say that it isn't now a big deal, but it was a bigger deal then. I mean, that was really something. I mean, opening weekend, of course, there was basically no recreational tourism traffic up in this part of the country, frankly. Yeah, well, pretty much all summer, but certainly not then. I mean, everybody came to fish. And that there was something about that opening weekend deal. It was always booked solid at the resort, Mom and Dad had there where I got hooked on fishing. And of course, in those days, I'm kind of known as Mr. Muskie these days, but I guess I've always been multi-species. But in those days, I love fishing for everything, I guess, as I do now. And that, to me, there was nothing like the month of May, but just I don't know, the quality of the bite for a variety of species. And then maybe, living in this country, I guess it's after the long winter, it's just getting back out there, being able to fish. But
Yeah.
it's just it's a prime time of year. It really is fun for a wide variety of species.
Well, I can remember going up to St. Germain and the streets of Minocqua on opening day where it was like a traffic jam and rain, sleet, snow. It really didn't matter. If you opening day was like kind of like the opening day of deer hunting season, wasn't it?
Yeah, really. Yeah, yeah. It's exactly like the gun season. Big deal. And frankly, there's few people that never even got out fishing the next morning, but by God, they made it up for opening weekend. So,
Yeah, same as the deer hunting deal. Hey, let's talk a little about conditions this time here, and we can start talking. I think northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin are pretty similar in ice cover and conditions, and it looks like it's going to be a late ice out this year. And what does that mean? I mean, does that if the ice goes out a week or a few days before opener, does that make fishing tougher?
it's a question actually that I've gotten for years. With basically no exact answer, but it's the way it's shaping up right now. I actually thought it was going to be a fairly early ice out because we had a
Mm-hmm.
warm spell. We didn't have a whole lot of ice, but now it's remained cold, and the extended forecast looks like it's kind of cold. It's going to be freezing again at night. So obviously that thawing process is going to be late. I'm quite certain the way the dates are lining up this year, there's going to be no issue as far as the lakes actually being open by opener, because opener isn't until May 6th. But it's going to be behind. And and I guess it's just in the way that you target things. Very very simply. One thing we always talk about, and most people target, popular for a lot of species, is early weed growth, and obviously that is going to be down quite a bit. That's going to be way behind if the ice only goes off several days before. So essentially what I kind of look at there, if you've got new weed growth going, you can absolutely, in my estimation, start out with that as your number one priority in a body of water where it exists. But if you don't, let's say the ice only went out 3-4 days ago, you really got to start looking around depending on conditions, because they could be quite a bit deeper. They could also be just in water that's adjacent to where the weeds normally grow, or shoreline type structures, and they'll actually be suspended. We see that in a lot of cases. I'm sure we'll get talking about it more, but sometimes the crappie bite is actually a suspended bite, depending on the type of lake that you're on and how far along the weed growth and water temperatures and stuff have warmed. So you got to be a little more adaptive. The later the ice out, I guess, the more you would kind of be thinking a little deeper. That if you're targeting bass, you may still be looking at deeper cribs and a whole bunch of things. I mean, they haven't even thought about coming into spawn yet or anything like that, right? So that's just how you play the game with the structure that's available, depending on water temperatures and ice out. But again, really focusing on the weed growth is a big thing. And then, before I forget the thought fleeting in my mind, the one thing about an area like this that you have here in northern Wisconsin, most of northern Minnesota, there's so many different options, right? So in a lot of cases, you would probably, if you have a late ice year like it's probably going to be this year, you're going to want to start off probably by targeting some of the smaller lakes, because those are generally out 7 to 10 days prior than the real big deep clear lakes, so you're going to have early growth.
Well, you and I, over the years, I guess I go back to 1993 is the first time you and I fished together in May, and we've kind of kept the tradition up ever since. Of course, we always have one of the best anglers in the entire world, Tex Maina, with us, your dad, and we're going to be doing that again this year. But what you just said makes a lot of sense. We'll go to a smaller lake, but a lot of times we like to go to the big clear lakes that are predominant in your area, and the same in Minnesota. And the way that you attack those lakes, to me, is really interesting over the years. The bays that warm up even last year's weeds are those the bays you look for?
Oh yeah, and in a lot of cases, we talk about new weeds, and new weeds are generally best. If you do have new weeds there, that to me, there's going to be the highest concentration of fish there. But it's a good point for late fall too. Will fish use dead weeds? Yes, absolutely. It's still cover, still structure. It's a good place for little fish to hide, and eventually predators are going to use it as well. So yeah, they will. So that's always something to look for as well. And then you can't forget about rocks and wood and all of those different things. And the other thing that we have quite a bit in this area that really is kind of underutilized with the Chippewa River and the Flambeau River and a bunch of different systems we have here. We in this part of the state, and the same thing in northern Minnesota, there's actually more river type situations than in some cases small river situations that can provide a different bite as well. As always and forever, to a certain extent too, where you're talking about patterning, and what you and I generally discuss and generally do is have a plan of what is the likely priority to start off, whether it's weeds, rocks, woods, depending on the lake itself, the structures available and water temperatures and all those different things. And then you just got to kind of work the process from there. You either got to try a little deeper, a little shallower, and the different structures. And generally, you can get on fish. Like you mentioned, the big, deep, clear lakes. I mean, in a way, you could argue it's better to be on the smaller lakes that warm up quickly and this, that, and the other. But I would also argue that most of the time, it might not be my first choice in presentation and structure, but usually you can figure out where to catch some fish on any body of water this time of the year, unless it's a super tough day. I mean, obviously there's days that the fish are really turned off because of weather conditions and different things, but usually you can find them and figure out something that's going to make them want to bite.
Well, what's kind of fun over the years, when we do find some decent weeds or a decent bait of fish, whatever the lake may be, it's we're after walleyes, but it's kind of a multi-species deal. I mean, when we go into those old weeds, or if we can find some green weeds, we find walleyes, we find northern pike. There's even muskies swimming around. It really is interesting to look at that, isn't it? I mean, all the multi-species that use these warmer bays where the bait fish are.
Yeah, that it really is that warm water thing, and especially if you add new weed growth to it really is a pot. Pretty much everything that's in the lake is going to be in that bay to some degree, even if they're not known as shallow water species. They're probably going to be in there with things warming up, and you literally can. Often, not always, but often without even leaving the same area, you can pretty much catch every species in the lake by changing presentations a little bit and targeting. It doesn't always work out that way. But how many times have we filmed where, we're technically filming for walleyes and we've been catching some and this, that, and the other, but I'll switch over and start trying to catch crappies. And in a lot of cases,
sure,
I can catch crappies or bluegills or whatever it might be right along in the exact same area. And like you say, once in a while you'll either get a muskie to strike or see a muskie, and obviously northern pike are biting. And, depending on the lake, we've even had a few gar over the years. So you never know what you're
yeah, that's true. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the presentations that I like to use for walleyes in weed cover or even on shallow rocks, and then I'll ask you what you like to use. And for the walleyes, I mean, I don't know how many years I've always started out with the plastic and ripping the plastic. And one thing I want to mention too, if that gets caught on an old weed or a weed, rip it off, and a lot of times that's where you're going to get hit, But the jerk minnow, I think, is a really good bait this time of year. A paddle tail. A simple paddle tail like this on a jig head, real slowly over the top of the weeds, can be really deadly. And the hair jig is coming on strong on the Great Lakes. A simple hair jig like this. The problem with trying to work a hair jig through the weeds, it's not as effective as it is on the Great Lakes. But keep that in your arsenal there. And live bait, Tex is a master. I mean, give him a jig and a minnow and he will catch fish. And do you agree with this? I like to go as small as possible with the jig head to give it a little slower fall and a little more action. I'll even start out with an 1/8 in shallower weeds, 7, 8, 9 feet. Do you agree with that? Smaller jig head?
Yeah, and frankly, I would think Tex would agree with you too. I know that he will. Obviously, he's going to adapt if he needs to get a little deeper and this, that, and the other. But generally, with the spring fishing, he's starting with an 1/8 ounce, and he's caught a lot of really nice fish. That way, that smaller jig, and then. In some cases, I just wonder too. We'll be talking about some of the other things you can try this time of the year. But there's always the odd preferences for whatever it might be. It might be the jig and plastic, it might be the paddle tail against the jerk minnow. But maybe those small, a smaller jig and a smaller presentation. Sometimes Tex is only using 2 and a half inch minnows. So they're really pretty small at times. And, I don't know why. I always figure, especially a big fish, right? You think, big fish is going to want to eat a big thing and get its meal eating over with as quickly as possible. But sometimes they show a preference for the tinier stuff and big walleyes too. I mean, Texas caught enough, upper 20, 30 inch class walleyes over the years on a jig and a small minnow. So but definitely, I would say start lighter at first, and and then maybe if you need to branch out deeper, and then it's the same way with plastic. Sometimes maybe the faster fall is what they're in the mood
Yes.
for. And that might not even mean that you're going to deeper water, but you're just going to have to try jigging more aggressively. And you're going to have to be moving that bait faster, because obviously if it's shallower water, it's dropping real fast and hard. So it's a pretty aggressive approach, but sometimes that can work too.
Well, it's when we do our annual spring deal, we might fish 2 or 3 different lakes in a day. If we go to one lake, a deep, clear lake, they're not biting. We go to a smaller lake, they're biting there. But we're not afraid to move around if after an hour or two, we're just getting creamed. We're not getting anything. But when we fish together, we all use something different to start out with. And, I might start with plastic. Tex starts with the jig and minnow. And your first choice all the years that I've fished with you, or most recently, is a neutrally buoyant jerkbait, correct?
Yeah. That Livingston Jerkmaster, since I started using that. I mean, I caught fish on crankbaits over the years, but I would generally join in on jigs and different bait, and of course live bait. One other thing you can do if you do get in a position where it's a tough bite and you have a fair amount of fish located. We don't talk about it that much, John, because we don't really do it that much. We like to be able to move around and cover more water. But I'll tell you what, slip bobbers, this time of year too, with a live bait sometimes, and depending, obviously that's a weed type situation. You might be, if you're fishing a hard bottom situation. I actually like those Livingston sound bullets, kind of rigged so that they're up, with about a 3-4 foot leader. They're up above whatever kind of minnow you're using. Generally, a minnow is going to be better than leeches and stuff in this cold water deal. And
right.
Obviously, a night caller might work, but I wouldn't really suggest that either. They'll generally bite a minnow better, and the little fish will be getting that night caller tore off of there. But I don't know if I actually have the deeper diving Jerkmaster here with me, but the number of fish I've gotten on these baits over the last few years is just amazing. And again, this is the shallow model. This will run about 5 to 6 feet, this particular model, and the other one's going to run down about 9 or 10 or so, somewhere in that range. And they're both neutrally buoyant. And what I've actually done that has just really worked quite well the way we like to fish together, you and Tex and I, in recent years, is that I actually let you guys work more directly. I'm in the back of the boat, and you guys are working the weeds a little shallower than me generally, and I will actually start with that deeper diving Jerkmaster, and I'm literally targeting the edge and the deeper water all the time, at least at first. And then if patterns start going where, maybe you guys are pulling more out of the real shallow weeds, obviously then I'm going to switch to a shallower presentation and go to that shallow Jerkmaster. And then, of course, just the way I work it as well, the shallow one floats up a little bit quicker. So you can actually, you can control the depth quite a bit and get it up over the weeds as well if you want to. And then I guess we should just talk about it. We talk about it all the time, but it's always worth mentioning as well as how important the pauses can be. Not always with these baits, but boy, it seems like the majority of the time, pausing those crankbaits and especially the Livingstons with the EBS sounds chirping. I always put myself in the fish's place in that case. I mean, if you've got that bait that looked erratic, looked wounded, and you're kind of following it, and you're looking at it, and you're thinking, oh, am I going to eat this or not? And then all of a sudden it just stops there, and it's quivering and maybe floating up a little bit. But then, unlike any other lure, it's got that little. How do those sounds go, John?
No, they're actually recorded electronic bait fish sounds, bait fish in distress sounds, and I've seen it work over the years. I really have, but I want to accentuate again. The retrieve is, and I watch you. You change your rhythm a lot till you figure out what the fish wants. But your pauses, again, folks, when we talk a pause, I might just think 1 second. You can leave it hang there 4 or 5 seconds and trigger a strike.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can leave it there a long time. And the most important thing that I mean, it might be the single biggest general fault I see in anglers is, not trying to pattern, not trying to figure out what the fish are in the mood for. And it's easy to do. I mean, I have to beat myself over the head, and I also have to beat myself over the head to a certain extent to remind other people in the boat to be trying different things, because it's amazing how much it can make a difference. But if you've had success with a lure, I'm sure you do it with your jerk minnow. You've got a certain cadence, and especially if you really caught the heck out of them the last time you were out on the water, it's real easy to just go out and start doing it that same way and not try different things, not allow longer pauses, not try to jerk it faster, differently, extend the pauses in the case of the crankbaits. And I've had amazing luck now since I have really messed with that a lot, and the length of the pauses are way beyond anything I ever used to do. But that's also when I've seen the success, so that's why I believe in it and continue to do it at times. But like I say, if it's a real tough day and the pattern's that way, I'll get one cast to 3 or 4 casts by somebody working a jig, which is supposedly a slower presentation. But that's, if they're really in the mood for that pause, that's how much time I take on a retrieve. I really try and concentrate to keep my bait where the fish are. If it's precisely on the edge of that weed line, I really concentrate on that, and I concentrate on letting it hang there. Because I think in a lot of cases you are literally probably pulling fish out of the weeds that are as much as 5 feet or further away, and I think that's why the hang is effective.
Well, one thing I want to mention too, and you brought it up there, and I'm kind of worried about my fishing lately, because I'm always fishing last year, the year before, thinking it's going to work every year, and been married to one bait for so many years that I think it's time, and I getting out fished in the boat, to be open to trying the jerk master more, trying live bait more. I keep thinking that plastic's going to work the same way it has the last 15 years. And fishing changes, and fish change. And I've been guilty of you kind of alluded to it before. I'm kind of used to getting to the point where I rely too much on one bait, and I got to branch out a little bit. And I think some fishermen are guilty of that,
Oh, well, we all are. I mean, my biggest personal pet peeve with myself is when I've tried a presentation. It usually happens to me musky fishing more than anything else. But I put it on, and I try it for a while, and then I take it off, and it's just always kind of been the way I think, and I'll be like, what, I didn't really try it fast, or I didn't try it slow, or I didn't try this, or there's so many different things you can do, especially with some of these artificial baits, to try and trigger fish. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it here shortly. The same thing for panfish. in a lot of cases. People don't think of that, and for years and years and years, people have fished panfish with a minnow under a bobber and not even moving the bobber
Yeah.
at all, just hoping the panfish are going to come to the minnow and eat it. But, there's a lot to it. And I think I really, really believe this, especially because of the electronics and just everything is so much better these days than it used to be. And I believe there are more fishermen as well these days. So it almost kind of makes sense to a certain extent. You do have to try different things because these fish do get educated. It's a combination of all of the fishing pressure and catch and release. Catch and release is great, but those fish are a little smarter. Every time they get caught and they get thrown back in the water, whatever happened to them, they're kind of like, man, that thing
Wow.
looked good. But I had an out of water experience. They took pictures. This guy Gillespie screamed, "Get the net!" And and I don't know if I really want to do that again. So so they're thinking, what are things to avoid? So to a certain extent, obviously, somewhat jokingly, but not really. They're learning, and to a certain extent, you maybe got to show them something different. I'm sure I maybe will. Fortunately, it hasn't happened yet. But if you beat them up with too many jerk masters, sooner or later, if you release the same fish like 8 times, that he actually might hear that nice little noise and go, "Oh, I've seen that before."
Ooh.
Turn around and run away.
I'm leaving. Well, before we move on to, panfish and bass and whatnot, I just want to cover walleyes real quickly on the Great Lakes. And, the post-spawn bite on the Bay of Green Bay is outstanding. I mean, everybody wants to go there pre-spawn. There's 500 boats in the parking lot and Ocano and Peshtigo and whatever. And the post-spawn bite is actually easier to fish than the pre-spawn bite. And that'll run all through May. And I talked to my buddy Brett Jolly the other day, and it was kind of a nice day. And I said, so this is post-spawn now. I said, how many trucks in the parking lot? He said, 3. Compared to 500 when the pre-spawn bite was going. But the post-spawn bite on the Bay of Green Bay is outstanding, folks. Hair jigs have taken over, I think, is probably the number one bait out there. But as you get into a little warmer water, and the fish, by the way, post-spawn have moved up real shallow. We catch them in as shallow as 2 feet of water this time of year, Pete, and the hair jig works really well. And I was kind of talking before about, sticking with that jerk minnow for so many years. Well, the bait pattern has changed on the Bay of Green Bay. They're not as much after shad anymore. Now they're more after gobies. So a bait like that moves slowly over the bottom has gotten a lot more effective. Now, as the water warms up, you got ripping style baits. Something like a Castmaster. Ripping a Castmaster will work really well, even as shallow water is 4 feet. Casting up and let that flutter down, and you can always watch your line and see that tick. But they also like the more aggressive baits in late May, and one of them that we really like and we had really good success with the other day was the Pro Ripper. Do you have a Pro Ripper handy there by any chance? If you don't, I can run in the other room.
I have one here. It's it's essentially a lipless crankbait, but the Pro Ripper Magnum is a heavy bait, so it drops real fast, and that's what you're looking for in that.
Boy, Jolly caught 5 fish and 5 casts on the Pro Ripper the other day, and it's the type of bait. These fish are aggressive, they're hungry, and boy, can you cover water. And you work that. How do you work that Pro Ripper?
Well, it's like anything else. It's going to fall at the same speed either way, but it's basically ripping, lifting. I do basically 3 to 4 foot just pulls, and then sometimes I really add snap to get real aggressive as well. But essentially, you're just allowing it to drop fast, kind of following it with your line, so you're ready to set the hook in case they hit right on the drop. But in a lot of cases, I would say the vast majority of cases, you're going to get your strikes right as those things go back down to the bottom. Whatever it could be sand, rock, gravel. In a lot of cases, you're fishing, and sometimes I also use them on weed lines. If you've
Yeah.
got a real, you can actually rip them through and break weeds as well, and that's one thing. That's one thing you can try too. It's a little more work, but when you've got that no stretch line like that Seagar Smackdown that we use, and we do use fluorocarbon leader material, but that provides a little bit of snap there. You'd be surprised how often you can bust through weeds and literally bust through clean, even though it's a treble hook. You wouldn't think it'd be that easy to do, but you really can try that. So that's something you can get pretty aggressive in the weed bite as well if you haven't tried it yet with a rip jigging presentation. But generally on any of the harder soft bottom situations, when you're letting it fall back down to the bottom, right? You feel like you hit the bottom, but actually when you go to lift up, it's like you got a sack of potatoes on there, and that's your fish. And in a lot of cases, that'll be when they strike a smallmouth bass as well, not just the walleyes. I mean, you get a lot of your strikes, even the surprise northern pike or whatever I've caught on them. That's usually when they're going to hit. So at least it gives you an idea of when to do it. And then again, just try different rips, I guess, and lifts and drops. Obviously, you might try a little shorter too, a little more choppy. Fish might be in the mood for that, but it is definitely a reaction strike situation with that. And boy, is that a fun way to catch them! It really is.
Oh, really? Totally.
Yeah, they whack them, and they I don't know why. It just seems like they fight harder too after they hit a bait like that. Maybe they're mad.
Well, talking about the Bay of Green Bay, those ripping type baits get really, really popular in late May and June with the post-spawn fish. And reports from Lake Erie are pretty good too, Pete. They're in the post-spawn situation now. And guys actually use weight-forward spinners with a half a crawler on them now and cast out. And if they're in 30 feet of water and they're marking fish at 10 feet, they'll count to 10 before they start their slow reel. And they're just catching them like crazy over there. And that's a great spot. And real quick before we move on to panfish, you mentioned Smackdown line before, and we're talking a lot about ripping type baits, plastics, jerk minnows. I really like to use the high vis line. I will not fish anymore without a high vis line. To me, obviously you can see when your bait's hitting the bottom and you want to do your rip, but it also can be a bite indicator. There's nothing I love more than seeing that line jump when your bait's falling, which is the sign of a fish hit. But high vis line, as you get older, you can't see that other stuff, and the high vis really helps me keep an eye on what's going on with my bait. You agree?
Oh, that's a real good point. It's arguable visibility wise. I mean, they do have what they call stealth gray. I use that a little bit in the real clear water situations, but I'm like you with regard to that. I think if you're using a long enough fluorocarbon leader, I don't care how clear the water is. I think from a standpoint, especially if you're using aggressive presentations like we talk about that we both like to do, a lot of your hits are going to be such where seeing that line jump is the situation. With a crankbait too, you're always, one of the things I like about the crankbaits is the strikes are harder as well, besides it being just more fun. But the fish don't always grab a crankbait or any presentation and turn sideways where you really feel that whack. In some cases, they're actually quite aggressive, and what's happening is they're coming hard, and their momentum just carries beyond, whether they're grabbing your jig with the jerk minnow or my jerk master or whatever it might be. And you don't feel anything because their momentum was moving faster than your retrieve. And all you're going to see is that line hop. I mean, that's everything. That's the whole indicator. Usually with that smackdown, you feel something. You can actually feel the slack as well. But the wild card with all of that, of course, is wind. and that's where that line really comes in, because you can generally still see the hop even if there's a bow in that line.
Well, I want to, before we leave the line subject, I get a lot of questions about the line. I spool I probably have 8 reels in my boat that are ready to go, multi-species stuff, right? But I put 20-pound smackdown on all of my reels, and then I change my leader material to fit the species I'm fishing for. And I got to tell you that I have switched in the last 2 years to the Seaguar fluorocarbon, and I'm running, excuse me, because of the aggressive style I'm fishing, I've gone up to 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon leader. And the leader material is virtually, the Seaguar makes it so thin, it's completely invisible to the fish. But for walleyes, I'm running 10 or 12. That's not too heavy, is it?
Oh no, frankly, everything considered with the fluorocarbon that they have. Seaguar invented fluorocarbon, and I'm generally not a completely jump up and down, guy with products saying it's the best, it's the best, it's the best. But I will say that about Amsoil, and I'm going to say that right now about Seaguar as well. I mean, they invented fluorocarbon, and it is really amazing product. And what you and I used mainly this time of the year is the gold label, and
Right.
it's unbelievably thin,
Yes.
for the pound tests, and obviously I don't know how they do it, or what even the right word is for it, for invisibility. But yeah, I mean, it's hard for the fish to see. It's incredibly strong for the diameter, but when you are, you can size on, obviously for panfish, we generally use 4-pound tests and that type of thing. But because we're being aggressive with our retrieves, and because we're talking about
Right.
big fish, and sometimes we bump into northern pike by accident, and with presentations, especially like the Pro Ripper Magnum, you're really getting, you're getting aggressive, and you don't want to take any chance by being underpowered in that situation. And to me, that's just that's the absolute perfect match, that 10 to 12, because nothing that that we do or we see is actually going to cause that line to break. You don't want to be leaving lures and fish, and they're unable to see it. So it works out quite well. Hopefully these dogs will go outside and bark at this mailman or whatever.
Well, I was just thinking they were agreeing with you, but just to recap on the line deal, I have all my 8 rods with 20-pound test smackdown, and then it's just as simple if you're fishing, hey, you want to use a little lighter line for live bait walleyes and a small jig, switch to your 8. But I mean, you can have the same rods with the same type line on it, and again, switch your leader to what you're fishing for, and it takes just a minute or two. And like you said, you use 4 for panfish, I use 6. And there's times when I'll even up, if I'm fishing on the Bay of Green Bay, I'll up my leader material to 15, 16 pound, depending on, what you're fishing for. But hey, you brought up panfish, and the month of May in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, can be a real fun time to fish crappies. And before I ask you where to fish, I got to show you my favorite crappie bait. What is that there, Pete? It's a crappie scrub. And that's one of my favorite colors there, my lemon meringue. And I also want to talk a little bit about the bobber. And I like the rocket bobber mainly because I can cast into the wind, or I can cast a darn long way with the wind. And, we don't work for rocket bobbers. I just fell in love with the thing recently. But the times that you and I have fished crappies up in the Sawyer County area, boy, we've run into some really big fish over the years. But I like what you do. What you do is just take the bow mount and you kind of scout weed flats before we even start fishing, right?
Oh yeah, that's definitely the way to try and find the fish. And the casting part and moving and covering water is actually pretty important. You introduced me to the rocket bobber as well. I've always specifically done the the slip bobbers, but that's, part of that system. The reason I did that is that provided longer casts. And rocket bobber's even better for that control wise. The only problem is if your eyes are getting a little older, sometimes you get it out there so far you can't tell if you got a bite or not on a windy day.
Well, that's why Blake has binoculars with us to watch the rocket bobbers. No, just kidding. But weed flats, bays, we kind of touched on this last month a little bit. But your weed flats, boy, they can be the fish can be real shallow. They can be in the middle of the weeds. But again, that just moving around real slowly with your bow mount is really a good way to kind of figure out if there's any life in those weed beds, right?
Yeah, that's you definitely want to find them first, and sometimes you may have to go real shallow, and in some cases, real thick cover and whatever. I mean, hummingbird electronics are absolutely amazing, but sometimes they're real shallow, and you're using your eyeballs and your polarized glasses, and you're going to find them up there. But they also, we mentioned too, if the weed growth is behind, the water's cooler, they can be over your shoulder of where you caught them the year prior as well. They can be out deeper. And in some cases, they might only be halfway down or within the top 4 to 5 feet of the water column. So you gotta look for all of that too. Now, if those fish are out there, that's where the side imaging and the live comes into play. You'll be able to literally find them. But certainly, you want to look around and make sure you're on fish. And usually, once that pattern comes, not always, but if you find a certain depth, certain weed type, whatever it might be, that'll usually be a pattern. You can most likely go to other places on the lake that have that similar type of weed, similar depth, and you should be able to find fish. So.
Yeah, that happened to me actually last year, fishing a lake around here in southeastern Wisconsin. No fish in the weeds at all. So we moved off into about 12, 14 feet of water off the weed edge. They were all stacked up there ready for that water to warm up. That's really a great point. And jig size on these, where did I put my little minnow deal here? Jig size can make a big difference. This is actually a 16th. There we go. Yeah. This is a 16th ounce jig head. And I was fishing with Rob a couple of years ago, and he was catching like twice as many crappies as I was. And it was just as simple as the fact that he was using a 32nd ounce jig underneath his bobber. And he was probably just getting a slower fall or better action, do you think?
Yeah, that's just one of those. That's why you can't just always go with the exact same thing you always use, or you shouldn't. And as much as we love those scrubs, bring some different type stuff out there too. I mean, start with the scrubs. They're unbelievable baits. We've caught tons of fish on them over the years, but here again, in a lot of cases, you can actually see the fish. You're on fish. And you shouldn't just try one thing and go ahead and move along. So, downsizing, lighter weight, but also, different soft plastics, smaller, thinner. Sometimes we use stuff that's, more considered like bluegill plastic instead of
right.
crappie plastic, a little bit smaller. And obviously you may want to get more aggressive too. I mean, how many times now? It's generally a little bit later in the year, around the time we're doing fishing with the stars type of thing, a little bit later in May. But how often have we found good crappie spots on those Jerkmaster crankbaits? The crappies are willing to hit.
That's a great story.
Yeah, by accident, you're literally, you catch a big crappie, and in some cases 2 or 3 crappies, and it's like, holy cow, we're supposedly walleye fishing, but I think it's time to crappie fish. And
yeah,
so they will grab the bigger stuff as well. Have some bigger soft plastics, and maybe, you and I don't believe in it. I'm sure we both agree that for crappies, you're far more better off with soft plastic than you ever would be with minnows. But, at the end of the day, it's always, not a bad idea to try it if you're on fish. And and not able to catch them. And so in some cases they get in weird moods, and that's why you want to try, different presentations, and then also how much you move it too. I mean, a lot of people are different. You can just throw your soft plastic out there and let it sit, or you can try and cover water, which is generally best, but try a little different cadences with that. Like I say, if these fish have been caught and released a lot, it might be just the way you're letting that bait fall back down. Maybe constantly moving it. Maybe try and pattern everything.
Well, that's really an excellent point. Doing a crappie show last month with Matty B in very cold water, by the way, just after ice out. They didn't want the pops that day with the crappie scrub and the bobber. They didn't want anything except a slow pull and drop. Slow pull and drop. If you were doing this, you didn't get bit. So that's really a great point on the retrieve. One other point I want to make, if you're going to use live bait for crappies, and that used to be my favorite way when I was a kid to fish them. And I found a very effective way to use a fathead was I would tail hook the fathead on a gold Aberdeen hook so that minnow could just swim like that, and the little flash of the gold hook would help draw the crappies in instead of just hooking them through the head, you know what I'm saying, where they don't have as much movement. I don't think I've ever done that with you, but that was a really effective way to catch them when I was a kid too.
Well, it's good. Actually, an interesting point. That's a patterning point right there. Those are things you can do with live bait as well as the way you rig them. I've actually seen times where they prefer head hooked, which you wouldn't really think, but that generally that tail hook is much more enticing. And obviously, the farther back you go towards that tail, makes the action even wilder when they're trying to get away. So it's those are little ways to pattern things too, for sure.
Yeah, and if I was in real shallow water, like 3-4 feet fishing crappies, I wouldn't use a sinker either. I just let that minnow tail hook free swim out there under a bobber. And of course, now I'm married to plastics, but that old system worked, it really did. All right. Should we move on to the bass category? All right. Late ice out is going to be kind of interesting this year, and you've got some great smallmouth lakes up there in the Hayward area, and some very good largemouth lakes too. So these bass are going to probably be on the deep edges this time of year, where a jerkbait is going to work best.
Yeah, I would say they're going to be a little deeper this time of the year, without a doubt. And it all depends on the lake itself. But a lot of our smallmouth waters here, John, have a lot of cribs these days, and that's always a good place to concentrate. As in some cases they're not placed the most brilliantly, but usually they do a pretty good job of where they're putting the cribs. So they got them on break lines and kind of strategically positioned. And I would say that's always, especially for smallmouth. Obviously, largemouth are a little different, but if you're targeting smallmouth, and you have a lake, not all of them are that way. But when I think about it now, the vast majority of our bigger, deeper clear lakes, for sure, have a lot of cribs on, and that's a big option. And generally, they scatter them around in different depths as well. Some are pretty darn deep. They're as deep as 30 feet. But wow. I would say the ones that are 10 feet to 18 feet, that type of thing, and in some cases even shallower than that. I mean, you're crazy not to try that. And then of course you're looking for areas on the edge or adjacent to where they're eventually going to be spawning. That's the other thing you want to look for. And then of course everybody thinks of smallmouth bass as hard bottom, I guess, or fish crib deal, but it's amazing how many of them dive right in the weeds too. So, I don't know if that, I wouldn't honestly say if you're set on catching smallmouth, that's the best place to start. But you will get, they will use the weeds as well, just like the largemouth will, and and that's another place to try them. Especially if you got a good population of fish in the lake.
Well, I like, I grew up smallmouth fishing down here, but I fished all over, obviously, the Midwest over the years. And using a crankbait on a deep edge can be deadly in early spring and in late fall, too, where those fish are just right on that deep break line where it maybe goes from, 10 to 30 feet. If you can find those deep break lines, a lot of times doing your retrieve with a jerkbait can be absolutely deadly, and you can cover a lot of water doing that too, right?
Oh yeah, it's a lot of water coverage, and either the rip jigging or of course my favorite is the jerk master, and I'm going to try that first because they usually are pretty aggressive in cold water. But then if you're on them and not catching them, that's it's tough to beat the jig system, and amazingly with smallmouth, even the bigger smallmouth, I mean, sometimes you got to size down for them as well. Dropping it down to slow fall, 1/8 ounce stuff. You don't really want to use something like that in deep water, but if it's a real tough bite, an 1/8 ounce jig and a 2-inch plastic can, a lot of cases, be the way to go. They're just in the mood for something like that, in the mood for something slow. I think in a lot of cases, John, obviously you generally don't use those wackies in real deep water, but in a lot of cases, you can weight them and get them down a little deeper. But that's another.
There's a wacky worm on the screen.
Yeah, those are, there's something about that. I mean, that's just a tough bite. It's to me, it applies exactly where I just mentioned of a lighter jig and a small plastic. It's something that works when nothing else is, and we've certainly seen that a lot with those wackies as well. I mean, shallow and deep. Sometimes that slow movement and that weird action. I've never figured out a wacky. Personally, I look at that and I think, why would a bass ever want to eat that thing hooked right in the middle like that? It looks like it just looks
no,
weird.
I know it does look weird, but when you see it in the water, even if you're not moving it, it's got that little, just like a bait fish being, even if you don't move it, it's kind of fluttering like that. One other good technique, by the way, and I found this on Lake Geneva with Maddie B smallmouth fishing last spring and in Door County. And you're talking about going small, and this is a paddle tail, and that's got like a small jig head on it. And I was using everything but what Matty B was using. And all he was doing was casting that out and reeling it as slow as he could. And he just caught the heck out of him, right?
Yeah.
But that's a paddle tail. And that's a Door County favorite in the spring. And by the way, when we talk about smallmouth, and we're going to move on to something else here in a minute, but we got to talk about Chequamegon Bay up in Lake Superior, which you and I love to go up there, and we're going to go again this year in mid to late May. And it's such a neat deal, and we don't know what we're going to catch. We're fishing shallow water. You're fishing your stuff. They bite on everything, but tell the folks how special that bite is up there in May on Chequamegon Bay.
Well, it's really kind of interesting, actually. I just talked to Josh. Actually, planning on fishing with him tomorrow. Right now, it's finally opening up. It's been kind of a slow process, but the one thing you can do that we generally don't film is go trolling out there. That's all going on right now, and that will continue through the month of May. And it's kind of an interesting.
That's for trouts.
Well, yeah, whatever. You can get different types of trout and salmon out there. They got the splake. There's a bunch of different things, and of course, you once in a while. I haven't caught many walleyes doing it shallow like that. Actually, fewer than I would expect, but northern pike once in a while as well. So that's always a fun thing. But when we get in there and we're actually targeting the bass. Boy, in recent years, not only will you stumble on one here and there anymore, it's pretty amazing how good the walleye fishery has gotten. And in a lot of cases, we're usually always catching our bass, but in a lot of cases, we're literally basically catching walleyes and bass pretty much even up.
And northern pike.
Well, yeah, certainly the pike as well.
And sturgeon.
But yeah, yeah, you get the occasional sturgeon as well. But I mean, what's the average depth in a lot of cases is sometimes 4 or 5 feet.
Well, yeah, and the only thing I'm concerned about this year, we're fishing. Last year we found the walleyes in 2 feet of water. The wind was blowing up against the shoreline. That was bizarre. But that is a great place to start your game fish season. Is up there in Ashland on Chequamegon Bay, and again, the shallower water, all the different species swimming together. It really is a blast, and you and I have gone back there in August where people say, "Oh, you can't catch walleyes here," and boy, you sure schooled us on that Pro Ripper that day, fishing some deep stuff, and it's just a great fishery, isn't it?
Oh, it really is it's an awesome fishery, and that is one place as well. You really want to have some Pro Ripper Magnums in your tackle box when you go up there for a variety of species of walleyes. Are really whack it, and I've done really quite well on the pike and smallmouth as well on it. The one thing that's kind of neat there too, I mentioned it with the trolling gig, and that's the way most people like to target the trout and the salmon up there. But if you're a strict caster, I mean, all you got to do is generally, you might not do that well in the real shallow stuff, but if you go where there's deep water access on some of those edges, and in that case, if I was going to pick a single thing to try, it'd be jigging a spoon, casting and jigging a Castmaster or something like that. But you got a good chance of catching browns and coho and stuff like that. Just casting a spoon or whatever other presentation. Generally, they react really well to a lot of flash. Generally not something that falls real fast like the Pro Ripper Magnum. You might get them on that, but they tend to be anything really flashy and obviously varying speeds of drop. That you can try, and just be patient and work the edges and deep water and shallow side of those deep edges. If you've got access to deeper water out there, you really never know what you're going to catch.
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to mention some of the tough things that happened in the Midwest this spring. The Mississippi River has been, it's about to crest, but it's been 9 feet above flood level, and that fishing over there has been really, really difficult. I had to cancel 2 trips over there. Hopefully by the end of May, the Mississippi River will be happening again. Wisconsin River is just back down to about normal, so that's a good thing. I'm a little worried about going up to Chequamegon Bay because they get a lot of runoff up there, and in the spring that can be pretty cloudy water too. I don't know how much snow you guys got left up there. Do you have much of right now?
No, I don't think we got much worry with snow melt anymore. But you never know. It's the Farmer's Almanac type thing had continued to say we're supposed to get more moisture. It doesn't have to come in the form of snow. We could continue to get a lot of rain. When it comes to rivers, though, very seriously, and Lake Superior, where you're expecting a lot of runoff, and it can really change the water clarity. That's something you want to keep an eye on. I mean, if you've got too much water in the river systems, it might not be even safe to fish it. The bite might be horrible, and so you do really have to play your cards there. And if it seems like it's extremely dirty, with runoff up in Lake Superior, or obviously combined with wind, can be a real problem up there. And if the water gets super duper dirty, you're just most likely going to fail.
Well, all right, buddy. Well, hey, I want to thank you for your time, and I will be fishing with you at least twice in May. We'll be together with Tex for our annual Walleye Multi-Species Fest, and then we have Fishing with the Stars over in St. Germain coming up in the middle of May. So I will see you soon.
Oh, yes, you will. And we'll catch fish soon.
And thanks to AMSOIL, I'll tell you what, folks, they've been a mainstay of our both of our careers for a long time, and every product they make makes all of my machines run better, I can tell you that. Well, take care, Pete.
You too, sir. See you next time.